Something is collapsing around the Sascha Riley story, and the person now helping expose that collapse is someone who once stood inside the network defending it. If you somehow missed this entire saga, here's why it exploded online. In late 2025, audio recordings attributed to someone identifying themselves as William Sascha Riley began spreading across the internet. The recordings contained graphic allegations involving Jeffrey Epstein, Donald Trump, and what Riley described as a wider abuse and trafficking network connected to powerful figures. The claims were never verified by law enforcement, courts, or mainstream investigative reporting, but the story spread anyway, fast. TikTok, Threads, Reddit, Substack, X, millions of views, endless analysis, entire communities forming around decoding the claims in real time. And at the center of the amplification ecosystem was a growing network of advocates, commentators, investigators, live streamers, and creators. One of the most visible among them was Troy Barile. But now, Troy Barile is publicly dismantling major parts of the very narrative he helped once elevate. To understand why this matters, you need to understand what made the Sascha Riley story so different from almost every other online controversy. This wasn't just one viral clip or one expose or one whistleblower interview. It became an entire participatory ecosystem. At the center was Sascha Riley himself, but orbiting around him were other influential figures shaping how audiences interpreted the story. Two names matter most here: Noelle Voldeng, the figure who first platformed Sascha's recordings publicly, and Troy Barile, one of the most prominent online advocates and commentators who later became deeply embedded in the narrative ecosystem surrounding the case. And now, those alliances appear to have fractured publicly, not quietly or subtly, but in a way that is causing parts of the entire online narrative structure to splinter apart in real time. Be sure to watch to the end to find out why Troy Barile has now withdrawn his support for Sascha, and also to hear Sascha's latest claims since he moved abroad. The first major wave of attention came through Noelle Voldeng's Substack platform. Long-form interviews, audio recordings, claims of unreleased evidence, mentions of law enforcement, references to congressional outreach, alleged supporting material still coming. And for many viewers, the emotional intensity of the testimony itself became the evidence. The story spread rapidly because it arrived inside an internet environment already primed by years of Epstein-related distrust. Audience had watched powerful people evade consequences for decades. So when Sascha Riley's allegations appeared online, many people interpreted them through that lens immediately. Soon the story escaped its original platform entirely. TikTok creators discussed it, Threads accounts amplified fragments of it, Reddit communities cataloged timelines and screenshots, independent commentators began building entire analysis ecosystems around the claims. One of the most important figures in that second wave was Troy Barile. At first, Troy appeared strongly aligned with the broader effort to investigate and amplify Sascha's story. He wasn't simply reposting clips, he was writing extensive commentary, building frameworks around the narrative, positioning himself as someone trying to understand what was the real inside the chaos. And according to Troy's later reporting, that proximity eventually gave him access to private conversations and behind-the-scenes interactions most audiences never saw. What makes the current fallout interesting is that the first major cracks did not come from mainstream media critics. They came from inside the same ecosystem that helped amplify the story. Public disagreements emerged around control. Sascha announced he was ready to go public with his story, and that's when Lisa made claims that Sascha wasn't complying with her framework around survivor privacy, and published letters saying she was no longer working with him. Then his interviews appeared behind a paywall, and people started asking questions about monetization, archive content, and platform ownership. Sascha publicly suggested at various points that parts of his testimony were meant to remain freely accessible. Noelle has disputed aspects of how those criticisms were framed publicly. But the deeper issue wasn't really about subscriptions, it was about trust. Because once audiences started noticing conflicting explanations coming from inside the same advocacy ecosystem, their narrative stopped feeling unified. And according to Troy's later account, that fragmentation was already happening privately long before audiences saw it publicly. In his own reporting, Troy claims Sascha privately described shenanigans behind the scenes. That matters because it suggests the internal breakdown may have started far earlier than viewers realized. But the real shift came when one of Sascha Riley's most visible online advocates began reassessing the story publicly himself. Because Troy Barile had originally been viewed as broadly aligned with Sascha's narrative, and then he began moving in a very different direction. In a lengthy investigative post, Troy described himself as the man on the inside, claiming that after initially supporting the broader narrative, he spent weeks communicating directly with Sascha through DMs, signal chats, calls, and private conversations. According to Troy, what he encountered privately began raising serious concerns about the reliability and structure of the story itself. He claims Sascha acknowledged there were parts of the narrative that he intentionally avoided discussing publicly because they sounded crazy. He also alleges Sascha described his online persona as different from his real-life persona, and Troy increasingly argued that many of his largest public claims involving political figures, institutions, historical timelines, and alleged collaboration lacked independently verified evidence despite becoming massively amplified online. That was the real rupture, not simply conflict around Lisa, but a prominent advocate beginning to publicly question whether the core narrative itself could survive scrutiny, because once somebody positioned near the center of the ecosystem starts reassessing the foundation publicly, the instability spreads outward fast. And at that point, the story stopped being who is controlling Sascha's narrative and became, can the narrative itself actually hold together? One reason the fallout matters so much is because Troy Barile wasn't a random outside skeptic. He had become one of the story's most visible validators, and validation ecosystems are incredibly powerful online, especially in emotionally charged narratives. Ironically, one of the most important public moments of this entire saga wasn't an article. It was a live stream. The TikTok live involving Troy Barile and Savage Siren became a symbolic turning point because it demonstrated how fully the story had evolved into a participatory internet theater. By that point, Sascha Riley was no longer controlled by any one person. It had become a decentralized online phenomenon, and decentralized narratives are extremely difficult to contain once they fracture. So what's going on with Sascha these days? Sascha is now living abroad and has recently relocated to Ireland according to his own public statements. He has also continued to maintain that he's willing to undergo a polygraph test, positioning it as a way to externally validate aspects of his account. And despite the increasing scrutiny around earlier parts of the narrative, he is still actively offering additional detail and context about his alleged experiences, including expanded claims that have not been independently verified, such as interactions he says occurred in proximity to figures like Jane Goodall during his childhood. None of these claims have been confirmed by law enforcement, court records, or mainstream investigative reporting, but they are still being added into the public narrative by the same source at the center of it. If you want the full expanded story from day one, be sure to check out my Sascha Riley playlist, which details the allegations, the early riff with Lisa Noelle, and the key moments from the TikTok live. Because once testimony, activism, live streaming, investigation, monetization, audience identity, and algorithmic amplification all merge together, the line between truth-seeking and narrative construction becomes harder and harder to separate. Be sure to like this video and subscribe, because as more stories like this emerge, I'll be the first to give you an objective review of not just the allegations, but how the story is spreading and evolving over time.